There's a certain kind of vision that opens only after the mind has been broken by truth. It's not a vision of the eyes, but of the soul, the kind that sees through masks, through illusions, through the shimmering surface of the world that others still call real. Spiritually awake people don't see more, they see differently. Their vision is quieter, slower, more deliberate. They see what others cannot. Not because they're special, but because they've learned to look where others refuse to. Carl Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." That single sentence holds the essence of awakening. The difference between the asleep and the awake is not intelligence, nor education, nor religion. It's honesty. Most people look at the world through the lens of what they wish was true. The awake have lost that luxury. They see the world as it is, stripped of illusion, unclothed of comfort. And what they find is both terrifying and beautiful. The spiritually awake see that much of what we call life is performance, an endless theater where people trade authenticity for acceptance. They see how conversations are rarely about truth, but about belonging. How success is measured not by purpose, but by perception. How the collective runs in circles, chasing validation while fleeing silence. They see that most of what society calls progress is simply distraction with better lighting. And in that realization, their heart begins to ache, not from judgment, but from compassion, because they once played that same game too. Awakening is not a sudden enlightenment. It's the slow erosion of illusion. One by one, the stories you built your identity upon begin to crumble. The roles, the titles, the beliefs that gave you meaning start to feel hollow. You begin to see that you were never really living, you were imitating. And when that illusion falls away, reality hits you like cold air after a long dream. You wake up not to heaven, but to the complexity of being alive. You see the light, yes, but first you must face everything that stands between you and it. That's what most people cannot bear to see, their own shadow. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Spiritually awake people have seen their shadow, not as a concept, but as an encounter. They have stood face to face with their jealousy, their fear, their resentment, their rage. And instead of running, they listened. They learned that the darkness within them was not evil, but exiled energy, parts of the soul waiting to be brought home. They see that every person's external conflict is only an inner one projected outward. Once you've seen that truth, you can no longer judge so easily. The spiritually awake look at others and see layers of pain hidden beneath behavior. They see the wounded child behind arrogance, the longing behind cruelty, the fear beneath control. Their empathy deepens, but so does their solitude. Because when you see this way, ordinary conversation becomes impossible. You can't gossip about someone once you've seen their suffering. You can't participate in noise once you've heard the silence beneath it. To be awake is to perceive the world symbolically. Jung taught that everything external mirrors something internal. The spiritually awake don't just see events, they see meaning. When something breaks, they ask what in them is being reshaped. When someone leaves, they ask what part of themselves is being released. When pain arrives, they no longer cry, "Why me?" They whisper, "What is this teaching me?" This shift from victimhood to awareness is what separates the asleep from the awake. Life stops being random and starts being revelatory, and yet this sight comes with a cost. The awakened see how deeply unconscious the world still is, how people worship distraction as salvation and fear stillness as death. They see how truth is mocked and authenticity mistaken for rebellion. They walk among the blind and realize they can't make others see. They can only hold their own light steady. That's the loneliness of awakening, knowing that seeing too much means speaking less. The awake often appear distant, not because they don't care, but because they care too deeply. They also see time differently. While others rush to the next achievement, the awakened move slower, sensing divine timing in everything. They understand that not all progress is visible. Growth happens in silence, in invisible moments of surrender. They no longer chase outcomes. They cultivate alignment. Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole, of reconciling the conscious and unconscious, light and dark, self and shadow. To the awake, this is the true purpose of existence, not to win, but to become real. The spiritually awake also see how the collective's obsession with positivity is another form of denial. They understand that light without shadow is delusion. True awakening doesn't deny pain, it integrates it. They don't run from grief. They descend into it until it turns into wisdom. They don't reject suffering. They use it as a tool for transformation. Jung said that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The awake know this intimately. They stop asking life to be easy and start asking to be conscious. When you awaken, you begin to see energy where others see form. You sense the motives behind words, the truth behind appearances, the vibration behind smiles. You walk into a room and feel the collective emotion before anyone speaks. You begin to trust intuition more than instruction. The world becomes transparent, not physically but psychically. And while others see coincidence, you see synchronicity. Patterns appear everywhere, in dreams, numbers, encounters, and timing. It's as if reality itself starts speaking your language. But here's the paradox. The more clearly you see, the less you need to explain. You stop trying to convince anyone of anything. You understand that everyone awakens at their own pace, and that forcing awareness only strengthens resistance. So you become patient. You love silently. You help invisibly. You become a mirror, not a preacher, because you realize that the only truth worth sharing is the one lived, not spoken. What spiritually awake people see that others cannot is not a secret realm or hidden dimension. It's the same world, but unfiltered. They see the same sky, but feel its silence. They hear the same music, but catch the spaces between the notes. They live in the same society, but refuse to be hypnotized by its noise. They are not better. They are just more awake. They have remembered what most have forgotten, that the sacred was never somewhere else. It was always here, waiting beneath the surface of everything. And when they look at you, they don't see your mask. They see your essence. They see your struggle, your light, your potential, your pain, and they love you through it. Because they know that one day you'll see it too. Comment this phrase below, I see beyond illusion, and if this message awakened something within you, subscribe, because the next part will reveal what happens when your vision deepens and the world begins to shift around you. To awaken spiritually is to inherit a new kind of vision, one that cannot be explained, only lived. The mind that once processed reality logically now begins to perceive through intuition, through symbols, through invisible threads of meaning. It's as if the soul grows eyes of its own. Carl Jung said that the psyche is a self-regulating system that seeks balance between the conscious and the unconscious. When that balance begins to restore itself, your perception changes completely. You start to see that the visible world is only the surface of something immeasurable, a skin stretched over infinity. The spiritually awake begin to notice that life speaks in symbols. Every encounter becomes an echo of the inner world. You realize that the people you meet are not random. They are mirrors, each one reflecting a part of you you've yet to integrate. Every coincidence begins to shimmer with intention. Jung called this synchronicity. Meaningful coincidences that defy logic yet reveal order. To the asleep, they are accidents. To the awake, they are communication. The universe is no longer silent. It whispers through pattern, rhythm, and repetition. You may notice the same numbers appearing everywhere, the same song playing at the right moment, the same thought reflected in the words of a stranger. These are not tricks of chance. They are dialogues between the self and the soul. The spiritually awake have learned that the universe is not external. It is participatory. Your thoughts, emotions, and intentions shape the energy field you live in. What you focus on begins to find you. Jung wrote, "We meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life." That is the law of synchronicity, not superstition, but psychology at the level of spirit. As this awareness deepens, your sense of separation dissolves. You begin to see that you were never a solitary being moving through a disconnected world. You were always part of one great living organism, the web of consciousness itself. You see that the collective unconscious, that mysterious realm Jung spoke of, is not theoretical. It is real, alive and constantly expressing itself through symbols, myths, and dreams. The spiritually awake recognize that dreams are not fiction. They are messages coded in the language of the soul. They see that what the ancients called spirit and what psychology calls the unconscious are two words pointing to the same infinite intelligence. But awakening to this level of vision is not peaceful at first. It's destabilizing. You begin to perceive how much of the world's activity is rooted in shadow. You see how fear disguises itself as ambition, how greed hides behind virtue, how manipulation masquerades as love. You look at institutions, governments, religions, and even personal relationships and realize that most of them are built upon unconscious patterns of control. Jung warned that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. When you start seeing through these disguises, it's hard not to feel disillusioned. But that disillusionment is necessary. It's the death of naivety and the birth of discernment. The spiritually awake also begin to notice that emotions are no longer personal. They start to sense the collective field, waves of sadness, anxiety, or hope moving through humanity like unseen weather. You realize that not every feeling is yours. Some are echoes of the collective psyche calling for healing. This realization is both liberating and humbling. You see that your healing contributes to the healing of the whole. That's why Jung insisted that the salvation of the world consists in the salvation of the individual soul. When you integrate your shadow, you lighten the load of the collective shadow. Every inner victory is a service to the world. This vision changes how you love. The spiritually awake no longer love people for who they appear to be, but for who they truly are. Fragments of the divine playing human roles. You stop loving for comfort and start loving for truth. Love becomes less about possession and more about perception. You begin to see love as the energy that holds all opposites together, the same energy that unites shadow and light, death and rebirth, God and man. Jung saw this in the symbol of the mandala, the sacred circle that represents wholeness. To the awake, love itself is the living mandala, the geometry of God in motion. The more awake you become, the simpler your life grows. You begin to declutter not just your home, but your mind. You let go of unnecessary noise, unnecessary people, unnecessary identities. You no longer chase stimulation because you've discovered fulfillment in stillness. You find beauty in what others overlook, in silence, in the breath, in a single beam of light cutting through the dark. To the world you may appear withdrawn, but inside you are fully alive. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That privilege demands solitude. It demands the courage to see through the noise and stay faithful to the silence. The spiritually awake also begin to perceive time differently. They sense that the past, present, and future are not separate. They interpenetrate. Memories resurface not as random recollections, but as keys to unresolved energies. Déjà vu becomes a sign of alignment, not confusion. The awake understand that consciousness moves cyclically, not linearly. The same lessons repeat until the soul learns their pattern. Life is not a straight road, but a spiral, drawing you ever closer to your center. Jung saw this in the process of individuation, a lifelong journey of returning to your divine essence through cycles of trial, insight, and rebirth. But perhaps the most profound thing that spiritually awake people see is the divine intelligence behind everything, even suffering. They stop seeing pain as punishment and start seeing it as preparation. They recognize that the universe is not against them. It is refining them. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every loss was a teacher in disguise. The awake understand that grace often arrives wrapped in chaos. Jung believed that the purpose of life is not happiness, but meaning, and the awakened find meaning in everything, even the dark. They know that what breaks you also opens you. Once you see this, gratitude replaces resistance. You start to thank the very storms you once begged to escape. You stop asking for an easier path and begin asking for a clearer sight. You trust life's design even when you don't understand it. And that trust turns into peace, not the fragile peace of perfection, but the steady peace of surrender. You realize that the world doesn't need to change for you to feel free. You only need to change the way you see it. The spiritually awake don't see the world as broken anymore. They see it as unfinished. They no longer separate the sacred from the ordinary. They see God in chaos, light in shadow, love in loss. They see that the divine never left, only perception did. And now that perception has returned, every moment becomes holy. The awake live in that quiet sanctity, walking through the same streets as everyone else, but feeling eternity pulsing beneath their feet. This new vision doesn't make life easier, it makes it richer. The awake still cry, still bleed, still struggle, but their suffering has texture now, depth, not despair. They see the wound as the window, the breaking as the becoming. They no longer pray to be spared from life. They pray to be present for it. They no longer ask God to remove the storm. They ask to see the purpose in the rain. To see what others cannot is both a gift and a burden. You carry light, but the light exposes everything, not just beauty, but decay. It shows you the fragility of all things, the impermanence of every form. But in that fragility you find awe. You stop trying to hold the world still, and instead you let it move through you. You learn that seeing clearly is not about changing what is seen. It's about loving it as it is. Jung once said, "Enlightenment is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming whole." That's what spiritually awake people see that others cannot. The perfection in imperfection, the holiness in humanity, the light hidden inside the wound. They see that the purpose of awakening was never to escape the world, but to illuminate it. Comment this phrase below: "I see meaning where others see coincidence." And if this message resonates with your awakening, subscribe, because the next part will reveal what happens when this vision matures and you begin to live entirely guided by divine awareness. When the spiritually awake reach a certain depth of vision, something extraordinary begins to happen. They stop observing the world as separate from themselves. The boundaries between inner and outer reality blur, and the universe starts to look less like a stage and more like a mirror. You begin to realize that consciousness is not trapped inside your mind. It flows through everything, shaping the fabric of existence itself. Carl Jung wrote that the self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both the conscious and the unconscious. It is the center of this totality, just as the ego is the center of consciousness. This realization changes everything. The spiritually awake now understand that what they once called God or fate is not external. It is the self expressing itself through all forms. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about individuation, not the creation of an isolated identity, but the birth of divine participation. The individual doesn't dissolve into the collective, nor stand apart from it. They begin to see themselves as a conscious cell within the body of God. Every breath becomes communion, every act becomes a dialogue with the infinite. You are no longer praying to something out there. You are conversing with the intelligence that pulses through your very being. When this level of awareness emerges, perception transforms from duality into unity. You stop labeling experiences as good or bad, success or failure, light or dark. You begin to see the divine symmetry behind all opposites. Pain and joy become two sides of the same movement, expansion and contraction in the breath of creation. You recognize that what you once feared was never the enemy, but the teacher. The spiritually awake don't avoid the dark. They understand it as the raw material of light. Jung knew this deeply, that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off parts of the psyche, but by embracing them. At this stage, the world itself becomes transparent. You look at people and see their essence rather than their expression. You begin to see every soul as a fragment of the same eternal consciousness playing different roles for the sake of learning. Judgment evaporates because there is no longer other. Every encounter becomes sacred, every stranger an aspect of yourself in another form. This is what Jung meant when he said, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know." The spiritually awake have met that other, and through that meeting, they see the divine in everyone. It's a quiet vision, not dramatic, not loud. It humbles you. The more you see, the less superior you feel. You realize that awareness is not achievement, it's grace. You stop claiming ownership of your insights because you understand. They were never yours. They passed through you like wind through open branches. The ego's crown dissolves. You no longer need to be the awakened one. You are simply part of awakening itself, a process, not a person. And then comes the moment of union, when you realize that everything you ever sought is already here. The search ends, not because you found an answer, but because the seeker has vanished. The self, which Jung described as the image of God within the soul, rises to the surface, and you feel what mystics across ages have called divine oneness. It's not a vision of light or angels or miracles. It's a profound stillness, a sense that nothing is missing, nothing broken, nothing separate. You are no longer trying to reach God, you are breathing God. This union changes how you move through the world. You no longer act from desire or fear, but from alignment. Life becomes effortless, not because it's easy, but because resistance has disappeared. You don't try to control outcomes, you participate in flow. You don't chase success, you serve meaning. Jung called this living from the self, where the will of the individual and the will of the divine become one and the same. It's not obedience, it's harmony. It's when what you want naturally aligns with what life wants for you. The spiritually awake also see that reality responds to consciousness. They notice that when they move from peace, the world around them organizes itself. When they fall into fear, chaos follows. They realize that reality is interactive, that matter itself is intelligent, responsive, alive. The line between science and spirit fades. Everything becomes energy, and energy becomes language. You understand that every thought is a seed and every emotion a prayer. The world is not happening to you, it's happening through you. But this level of sight brings with it immense responsibility. To see the divine in all means, you can no longer escape accountability. You can no longer pretend to be powerless because you've seen the architecture of creation itself. Every word, every thought, every choice ripples through the field of being. Jung warned that the world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. The spiritually awake have answered that question, and now the world reflects it back. Life no longer tolerates falseness. Every lie burns faster, every truth manifests quicker. Awareness sharpens consequence. In this awakened vision, love becomes your natural state, not the emotional high of attachment, but the steady pulse of compassion for all that is. You love not because someone deserves it, but because you've realized that love is what you are. The divine intelligence that animates the stars is the same energy that beats in your heart. Jung believed that the self is the totality of existence, that to know yourself is to know God. When you finally feel that truth, the need to preach disappears. Your presence itself becomes prayer. You start to move differently. You walk slower. You speak with more intention. You feel the weight and holiness of every word before you release it. You sense the vibration of your energy in every space you enter. You no longer live for outcomes. You live as offering. The awakened person's life becomes a living mandala, a moving pattern of meaning and surrender. Every interaction, no matter how small, carries spiritual significance, but this doesn't make them detached from humanity. On the contrary, they become more human, profoundly human. They cry more easily, laugh more freely, love more fearlessly. Their sensitivity is no longer weakness, it's communion. They feel everything because they no longer block anything. They are not above the world. They are fully in it but not trapped by it. They can hold suffering without drowning in it and joy without clinging to it. That's what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. It's the ability to stand between light and dark, heaven and earth, without needing to choose one over the other. This is the secret of the spiritually awake. They live in paradox. They are free and yet deeply responsible, detached yet full of compassion, still yet passionately alive. They no longer see God as something to worship, but as something to witness. Every breath, every act, every thought becomes participation in the divine play. Jung might say that this is the stage where consciousness becomes transparent. The ego no longer blocks the light of the self. It becomes the window through which that light shines. And when you reach this vision, fear disappears. Not because danger no longer exists, but because you understand that death itself is just another doorway. You've seen beyond the illusion of endings. You've glimpsed eternity not as a far away heaven, but as the dimension already here, vibrating beneath all things. The spiritually awake see death as transformation, loss as liberation, time as an instrument of growth. They no longer beg life for more years, they thank it for each moment. The deeper the sight, the simpler the truth. Everything is one, and everything is love. But this truth can't be taught, it must be remembered. That's why the spiritually awake don't argue anymore. They don't debate theology or philosophy. They understand that words divide what experience unites. So they stay silent more often, not out of secrecy, but out of reverence. They see that God doesn't need explanation, only attention. In this state, even the smallest details become divine. The movement of wind through trees, the reflection of light in a puddle, the laughter of a child, the ache of the heart. Nothing is ordinary anymore. You stop waiting for miracles because you realize that existence itself is one. The spiritually awake walk through the world with soft eyes, eyes that see eternity in the temporary, the infinite in the fleeting, the sacred in the mundane. And perhaps this is what others cannot yet see, that the divine is not hiding in some distant sky, but in every breath, every sound, every moment of awareness. That heaven was never a destination, but a perception. Jung understood this profoundly, that the journey to God is not an ascent into light, but a descent into depth, into the soul, where the divine and the human are one. Comment this phrase below, I see God in everything. And if this truth resonates with your awakening, subscribe, because the next part will reveal how to live with this vision daily, turning awareness into wisdom and wisdom into divine action. There comes a moment when the vision no longer surprises you, it simply is. The spiritually awake stop chasing revelation because they have become revelation itself. Awareness is no longer something they visit during meditation or silence. It is the air they breathe. What began as awakening becomes embodiment. What was once insight becomes existence. Jung called this stage the realization of the self, the full integration of the divine image within the human soul. At this point, seeing becomes being, and being becomes love. When you live from this awareness, life stops feeling like something happening to you. It feels like something happening as you. You are no longer a fragment of creation. You are creation experiencing itself in form. The trees, the stars, the strangers you pass on the street, all of them are part of your own infinite reflection. The boundaries of self dissolve not in madness, but in reverence. You look at the world and whisper, "This is me." And in that moment, you finally understand what the mystics meant when they said, "I and the Father are one." Carl Jung saw this as the true goal of psychological evolution, not perfection, but wholeness. Wholeness means embracing everything, shadow and light, life and death, silence and sound. The spiritually awake no longer try to escape contradiction. They live inside it peacefully. They have made peace with duality because they have seen the unity behind it. They understand that the divine doesn't erase opposites. It unites them. Love is not the absence of darkness. It is the light that allows darkness to exist without fear. At this stage, life becomes a continuous act of surrender. You no longer resist change because you see its necessity. Every ending carries renewal. Every death carries birth. Jung wrote, "The shadow is the seat of creativity." The spiritually awake have learned this truth. They no longer flee from pain, for they know pain polishes the soul. They don't fear loss, because loss is how the infinite makes space for new creation. They don't cling to joy, because they've learned that joy is not something to keep. It's something to flow through. The awake move through the world quietly, carrying an energy that feels like home. They don't argue or convince. They radiate. They understand that truth cannot be sold or forced. It can only be remembered. So they live in a way that makes others remember. Their kindness disarms. Their calm slows the noise. Their presence teaches without words. Jung would have called this the archetype of the wise old man. Not a gender, but a state of being. Wisdom born from the union of heart and mind, human and divine. To others, they may appear ordinary. They go to work, they eat, they rest. But inside, everything is sacred. They have realized that the temple of God was never made of stone. It was made of awareness. Wherever they go, they carry that temple with them. Every act, washing dishes, speaking softly, holding another's hand, becomes prayer. Every breath becomes gratitude. They don't chase enlightenment because they have discovered that enlightenment is not an event. It's a lifestyle. The spiritually awake no longer divide the world into spiritual and mundane. They have seen that every particle of existence is alive with the same intelligence. The laughter of a child, the fall of rain, the silence of midnight, all are expressions of the same eternal consciousness. They see that God is not hidden in clouds or holy books, but in the quiet detail of every living thing. They have finally understood Jung's deepest idea, that the divine lives within the psyche, that man's journey toward God is God's journey toward man. This realization transforms their relationship with time. The past no longer imprisons them, and the future no longer frightens them. They live fully in the eternal now. They move through each moment with reverence, aware that eternity is not endless time, but depth of presence. They no longer wait for miracles. They recognize that every moment is one. When they sit in silence, they feel the heartbeat of the cosmos echo in their chest. When they look at another person, they see a universe staring back. In this state, forgiveness becomes second nature. How can you resent another soul when you see that they are simply a different expression of yourself at a different stage of awakening? Judgment dissolves because you understand that everyone is doing the best they can with the level of consciousness they have. The spiritually awake stop trying to change people. They love them into evolution. Their compassion is not sentimental, it's elemental. It flows naturally like sunlight, expecting nothing in return. Even suffering changes shape in this awareness. It becomes sacred, a doorway into deeper connection. You realize that to be human is to experience both bliss and agony, and that both are holy. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The spiritually awake don't seek to eliminate pain. They seek to understand it. They turn it into wisdom, into art, into service. Their scars become scripture. Their wounds become windows where light enters. And as this light deepens, something profound happens. The fear of death evaporates. You stop trying to preserve yourself because you finally understand that you cannot die. You are not the body. You are the breath that animates it. You are not the thought. You are the awareness behind it. You were here before form, and you will remain long after it dissolves. Death becomes nothing more than a change of rhythm in the eternal song. The spiritually awake no longer chase immortality. They embody it. At this point, life and prayer merge into one. Every action is meditation, every silence communication. You no longer need to seek God. You realize you are constantly held within. Jung believed that the ultimate task of humanity was to reconcile spirit and matter, to recognize the divine within the human and the human within the divine. The awakened have completed that circle. They have remembered, and in their remembering they have become free. They see what others cannot, that heaven was never above but within, that salvation was never elsewhere but here. They understand that awakening was never about escaping the world. It was about transforming the way you see it. When you finally see with the eyes of the soul, the world becomes a cathedral. Every sound is a hymn, every face a reflection of God, every day a resurrection. So the spiritually awake walk gently, aware that everything they touch is holy. They don't seek to leave a legacy. They seek to leave love. They know that the only real work is the expansion of consciousness, and that every act of awareness, no matter how small, ripples through eternity. They live without needing to be remembered because they have already merged with what cannot be forgotten. Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you. But the spiritually awake no longer ask the world who they are. They have asked God, and God has answered through silence, through light, through life itself. And now they carry that answer quietly in their being. I am that I am. This is what spiritually awake people see that others cannot, that there is no separation between the human and the divine, that the purpose of life was never survival, but revelation. They see that the entire universe is a mirror reflecting one infinite truth, that love is the language of God, and consciousness is its sound. Comment this phrase below, I am one with the divine. And if these words spoke to your soul, subscribe, because awakening doesn't end when you see, it begins when you live what you've seen.